2021 census recently revealed the farmland acres in Ontario. Since the 2016 census, where 175 acres were lost per day from 2011 to 2016, from 2016 to 21, the province lost 319 acres of farmland per day to development. How will you build new housing, support economic development without taking more farmland?
Well, we simply cannot put up with urban sprawl, right? We need to preserve our farmland. I mean, without farmland, we can't grow food, and therefore we don't eat. I understand that there's a cap on how many buildings that, sorry, I'm not talking about that. I'm gonna go backwards. I think we need to keep it into the city, and as you know, we have a housing crisis. So you know, everybody wants to build outward because of our housing shortage. We do need to keep things back into the city. We have a few ideas on how to do that. First of all, especially in Sarnia-Lambton, we do have buildings that are not being used. We need to build on those buildings. We do need, unfortunately, we do like to pride ourselves as a small city, but we do have a problem. We have families sleeping, families couch surfing with other families. We need housing. We could build up. Another idea on these properties, we could start building up. Another idea that we had, we're looking at the zoning in Sarnia-Lambton. There's a lot of homeowners that would like to put like big tiny houses. They'd like to put them on their properties. They have decent properties, and it could be somewhere where they could rent or let grandma stay there, or put affordable renters in there, or provide affordable renting into these places. And I think that if we start to really just think about creative ways that we can increase the housing in the city properly, then we can avoid the urban sprawl.
Okay, George, thanks. Yeah, this question about urban sprawl and about housing, I think it's a good example. I see it out in Petrolia especially, but I think it's emblematic of what the rest of the province could do here locally. I think there's a big market for infilling. There's a lot of lots where we could infill. There's property that have been built there where the lots are, and they could actually infill, as Carlos said, also build up. Like that's what I see Mississauga's talking about that now. They're going to have to build up because they know they can't keep spreading out, so they're going to have to build some condos, some towers. It's not for everybody. When I'm in Toronto, I live in a condo now. You get used to it after a while, and I'd rather be in Petrolia and where I live now, but when you have to go down there to work, I mean, there's a lot of people, that's what they do. So, and Sarnia's in a kind of unique spot. They can't go west, and they can't go north, like at the lake on the north, the river on the west side, and of course the Chemical Valley, the industry on the south. So, you know, they either have to build up or they're going to have to go east. I think that solar plant out there was the worst thing that ever happened, built where it is, because that's kind of constrained growth. They have to go out around it. So, anyway, that's the way I see that. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Mark?
Thanks, George. 4 years ago, Doug Ford said he was for the people, but as Premier, he forked over farmland to rich donors and sat on his hands as the cost of everything, especially gasoline, skyrocketed out of control. People in rural areas like Sarnia-Lambton deserve a government that will put its money where its mouth is, investing in schools, hospitals, roads, and bridges rather than talking about it. From day one, Doug Ford has made it clear he'd rather chop up prime farmland and sell it to the richest donor than do right by Sarnia-Lambton. We need to build more homes, and we have a plan to do exactly that. An Ontario Liberal government will get at least 1.5 million new homes built in Ontario over the next 10 years, doubling the pace from building in the last decade. The target is what experts say we need to keep up with the population growth and build affordability back into Ontario's housing market. We will build at least 138,000 new, deeply affordable homes, including much needed supportive housing and homes for Indigenous people, as well as retain and repair tens of thousands of existing affordable homes. Every dollar invested in housing results in $1.40 in economic growth, and our housing plan will create an estimated 150,000 jobs per year. We'll tax homes that are currently sitting empty, ban new non-resident ownership, and a put it to use or lose it tax on developers' land currently sitting empty. and establish the Ontario Home Building Corporation to finance and build affordable homes.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Keith?
Okay. Well, I'm an analytical sort of person. I do a lot of work with maps to try and understand terrains and geology, and I think we should apply the same thing here in this case. I think what we need to do to start off with is to compile a really good database on the agricultural land in Sarnia-Lambton, but actually all over Ontario. Get all of that information into maps, analyze it, put some hard boundaries around land that will not be converted to anything other than agricultural use. And base that on analytical data on things like soil surveys. I had a quick look at the OMAPR website, and I saw that the most up-to-date soil survey from Lambton County is from 1957. Maybe we need to relook at some of that and get some newer data. I would echo one thing that Bob said here. I think we need to cease and desist from constructing really basically disastrous industrial solar complexes. They're not farms, folks. They're not farms. They're industrial complexes that they build. They eat up land near populated areas that could be used for housing. One other idea I'm going to introduce here too, with regards to the need for housing. I think we should maybe take a page out of Quebec's book here and start looking at having Ontario control to a large degree its own immigration, so that we can look at the people that we want to have immigrate here and how many we can afford to take in any given year. Quebec already does that. There's no reason why Ontario can't look at doing that too. For the record, I'm not against immigration, but I think we could do it better.
Okay, thanks, Keith. Yeah, I just got handed a paper here, so if you can kind of pivot your mic close to everybody when they go so that everybody can hear in the room. Okay. So, Dylan, you...
Is that better? Test. Sure. Oh, sure. Thank you.
Could you extend it out?
There you go. Perfect. Is that a little bit better for everybody? Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's an important one. We know that this community has been responsible stewards of the great agricultural land that we have here, and we know that there are concerns about urban sprawl and the unending appetite to build more roads and more houses. We don't think it's fair that this community should have to face that alone without support. The NDP will stop paving over farmland. Once farmland is lost, it's lost forever. We will protect prime farmland and water from land speculators and unsustainable urban development and expand Ontario's greenbelt, while increasing economic opportunities for farmers and agricultural operations. Before a project takes place on agricultural land, it will be subject to a mandatory agricultural impact assessment. The terms and conditions of that process will be developed in partnership with communities like this one, because communities like this one will know the true value of the land that people are thinking about building on. Furthermore, we're going to end exclusionary zoning, increasing the supply of housing options that are affordable. We will encourage responsible development within existing urban boundaries while protecting farmland and natural heritage from wasteful sprawl. The houses that we would be planning to build within these urban settings would be sort of the missing middle housing, duplexes, triplexes, and townhomes to stop people from falling behind even further. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Okay, so the next one we'll start with Bob, and there's kind of two parts in it, but I'm sure you can navigate them together. What will your party do to handle the impact of carbon tax on farmers, and what are your plans for carbon offsets for farmers?
Thank you, George, and that's one thing that we've fought, the federal liberal carbon tax. It's a hit on farmers for sure. We took it all the way to the Supreme Court. We weren't successful there, but we will continue. We will continue to fight that there as well. We took immediate action, to for helping to run the farms, make it more affordable for scrapping the cap and trade, and we continue to fight, like I say, all the way to the Supreme Court. I think the choice is obvious here. We're expanding natural gas into rural and small town Ontario, southwestern Ontario, so people can dry their grain by using natural gas where available. And we've worked to try and lower the costs for farmers, and we continue to take action in those areas. One thing I was told that's really made a big impact in the rural and especially the farm community is the accelerated depreciation, which a number apparently of farmers have taken advantage of to buy equipment. And I was told by a car dealer that sells a lot of pickups, he said, you guys should take more credit for that, because he says, help me sell a pile of big pickups to the farm community. And he said in the farm equipment business, it generates a lot of jobs there as well. So we'll continue that battle. Thank you.
Okay, Mark?
Thanks. Ontarians need clean, affordable, reliable energy to power our homes and businesses. That's a fact. Well, the Ford Conservatives came into office on a promise to cut electricity prices by 12%. And the Financial Accountability Officer says the average rates have increased by 4.3% under Ford Conservatives, regardless of a carbon tax. Ontario Liberals will develop a long-term energy plan that reverses the Ford Conservative cuts to conservation programs and includes the right cost-effective mix of nuclear, hydro, and other renewables. We'll cut pollution and make our electricity grid 100% clean by phasing out natural gas. We'll also eliminate set-up connection fees for rooftop solar and bidirectional electric vehicle charging, and support projects with Indigenous and Northern communities that reduce reliance on diesel and drive electrification in the North. We know over the past 2 decades, electricity prices have increased too much, too quickly, including during the last Liberal government. Increases in prices resulted from the $70 billion invested to clean up the dirty, unreliable system that was inherited because successive governments failed to bring any new generation of transmission into the province while borrowing the artificially frozen rates. Ontario is now coal-free and has a cleaner, more reliable energy grid. We're committed to a long-term energy plan that reverses the Conservative cuts to conservations and prepares our grid for the long term. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Keith?
Okay. Thank you. Well, the first thing we're going to do, and it's right in, it's one of the main items in our new blueprint, which is our election campaign platform for the New Blue Party of Ontario, is that we're going to axe Doug Ford's carbon tax, period. That's going to help save you a lot of money, and we're also going to cut the HST from 13% to 10%. So we're going to save you 3% right there. That's also going to be, first and foremost, a great help to the people of modest means, especially living in cities, for instance, who need some tax savings right now so that they can afford to buy the food that you produce, amongst other things. In terms of energy, yes, one of the things we need to do is to develop a long-term energy strategy. That's something that I've mentioned at a couple of previous meetings. I'm glad to hear that other people are adopting that idea now. That long-term energy strategy is going to have to include hydrocarbons for the foreseeable future. Nuclear, yes. Small modular reactors, yes. Natural gas, yes. And oil as well, to power our automobiles for a while. Take note, if you log on to CNBC today, there was an interesting article by the CEO of the 4th largest automobile maker in the world, Stellantis, who is also a large electric vehicle maker, saying slow down with the with pushing people to buy electric vehicles, because we're not going to have enough resources to build them in 2 more years. It's going to take years and years to find more resources. We'll get there. We'll get there.
Thanks, Keith. I should have pointed out earlier, if you have a question there, you put your hand up. Harry is at the back, and Brian, and they'll come and pick it up for you. So, okay, Dylan.
Okay, thanks. Another really important question. The NDP plans to bring back a new cap and trade system that makes big corporate polluters pay for their emissions, ensuring hardworking Ontarians in rural areas and in the trades, industrial sectors are not unfairly penalized. Again, this comes back to fairness. We also will ensure that 25% of the revenue that comes from this cap and trade system is going to go directly to supporting rural communities, northern communities, and low-income families that are disproportionately impacted by carbon pricing. We also plan to support business to turn farm waste into biogas and reducing energy costs and carbon emissions. Thank you.
Thanks, Dylan. Carla?
Okay, so here's one of those questions. I don't know, I don't have a lot of answers. My answer is short and sweet for this. So we support all tax cuts, but I do remember that the Ford government did promise that they were going to reduce the carbon tax coming up soon. My question is, why didn't they do it earlier? You know, it's so important that the carbon tax is literally, from what I'm hearing from farmers, is really cutting into their profits. It's causing high levels of anxiety. You know, we have enough with the weather and things like that. I spoke with a farmer recently, and this is just another situation as far as saving money and helping the farmers to save. I spoke to him, and he was telling me that the farmers have been forced to sell goods at a lower price to the middleman, or like big box stores. Then the middleman identifies inflation, raises the prices, continuing to make a profit while the farmer's left behind. So we can't let that happen either. So, you know, the government during COVID, we saw them bail out all of the big box stores, and now we have our farmers facing a crisis with the carbon tax. It's time that the government bails out you guys.
Thank you, Carl. Okay, our next question, we'll start with Mark on this one. What will your government do to reduce the vulnerability the agriculture industry faces due to supply constraints and high input costs? That's on diesel fuel, fertilizer, and pesticides, etc.
Ontario is blessed with an abundant food supply, but a few big companies dominate food retailing and processing. They control the prices, levy new fees on suppliers, and make significant profits. We're ready to take on these mega companies and their abusive behavior towards farmers by legislating fair and open negotiations between retailers and suppliers, a move that will drive down food prices in the long term. We'll also make Ontario's food supply chain more resilient by preserving farmland and promoting sustainable farming techniques, as well as investing in additional regional processing capacity and reviewing potential restrictions on foreign ownership of farmland. We'll develop a made-for-rural climate action plan that recognizes the unique challenges of reducing greenhouse gases in remote settings in the agriculture sector, which will include working with federal partners to strengthen the rebates. We'll push back against Doug Ford's anti-conservation agenda by bringing more lands under the Greenbelt protection in close collaboration with local and Indigenous communities and farmers. And we'll strengthen the powers of the Ontario conservation authorities to provide them with the tools and resources they need to prevent flooding and our national resources. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Keith?
So, if I understand the question correctly, it's related to supply chain.
Yeah, I'll reread it if that helps.
If you could, please.
What will your government do to reduce the vulnerability the agriculture industry faces due to the supply constraints and the high input costs on diesel fuel, fertilizer,
Right.
pesticides, etc.?
Well, the first thing we're going to do is to axe the carbon tax. And we're also going to, as I said before, drop the HST to just generally lower taxes so that we don't have that additional cost on top of what we're already paying for these resources. Another thing we need to do is to develop that long-term energy strategy, short, medium, and long-term energy strategy, both for electricity and for fossil fuels. That includes building pipelines, which of course we're going to have to work with our neighboring provinces on. I think here what we need to do is to elect several governments and conservative governments in several provinces, including right here in Ontario, where we need a new blue government. And we're going to talk to Ottawa, and we're going to tell them we need those pipelines to get that natural gas and fuel here. In terms of, I'm so sorry, but in terms of fertilizers, for instance, I wonder if there isn't some way to look at producing more fertilizer right here in this province. If I understand correctly, we rely a lot on imported fertilizer. I believe that's true. I think we should probably look at promoting the development of fertilizer plants, more fertilizer plants. I know we have some, but make more of that stuff right here in Ontario. Why not? It generates jobs too, creates employment and tax revenue that can then be used for lots of wonderful things like training, for instance, education and training. I'll leave it with that. Thanks.
Thanks, Keith. Dylan?
Yeah, thanks. Certainly my understanding is that there are some limitations to what the provincial government can do in this situation. However, we will ask the Ontario Energy Board to regulate gas prices similar to the way that is happening in Atlantic Canada. And we know that often farmers are often the price takers in this market, and we will support a grocery code of conduct to improve transparency and fair dealings in the grocery industry and stop large, monopoly type retailers from taking unfair advantage of food suppliers, which I think we all know is happening based on the record profits we continue to hear about from Loblaws and other grocery stores. We plan to bring in an ambitious energy efficient building retrofit program to help families and businesses with the cost of retrofitting their homes and lowering electricity bills. And we'll also ensure that large oil companies and other corporations making excess profits and the wealthiest individuals in this province, the multimillionaires, the billionaires, pay their fair share of taxes, because we all know that we've been paying our fair share and it's time that they do as well. The NDP is also planning on bringing in mental health care, dental care, and pharmacare into OHIP, which might be the biggest change to our healthcare system in the last 50 years. And we know that many farmers have suffered in silence, and our current mental health care system is not easily accessible and is pay for service. Thank you.
Thanks, Dylan. Carla?
Okay, so I'm going to be quick with this one too. I do agree with Keith that we do need to get the pipelines, coming back here. I mean, it's ridiculous that we have an area that's so rich in oil and gas, and we're obtaining our gas from somewhere else. In addition, I'm just going to go back to the same thing. We need to cut that tax. We need to cut that carbon tax for all Canadians, all Ontarians, but we also need to cut it for the farmers. One idea that I did have was to offer grants and subsidies, different loans to cover the increasing costs, the operating costs with the fertilizer, things like that. And in addition to that, we need to cut the red tape to simplify that process for them.
Thank you, Carla. Bob?
Okay, a number of things I'd like to get on the record. For the first time for a long time, this budget, 2022 and 23 budget in the province, we've increased by $92 million, the OMAFRA budget. It's a long time since the ministry, I think, has had a big increase like that. And that's a big help right there, because I know the services are taken advantage of by the farm community through OMAFRA. We also advocated to the federal government to extend the deadline for production insurance and added also to that pedigree seed coverage for program for soybeans, winter wheat, rye, barley, etc. And we also extended the ag stability enrollment to June 30th and increased the provincial share to 80%. The federal government would not step up. And we also increased the risk management program by another $50 million. And we're looking at that all the time. And of course, the minister also put a food security and budget supply stability strategy, which has got people in the industry and the farm community working together. It was funded with $10 million. So there's a lot of complicated challenges out there, and I think our government's the one to do it. We don't use sound bites, we actually have some accomplishments to look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Okay, so our next question will begin with Keith. So it is, what will you and your party do to protect, support, and strengthen rural schools?
Rural
Schools?
schools in particular. Okay, well, I've been thinking about this quite a bit recently in terms of schooling in general in Ontario. And the last few days I've been focusing on the agricultural sector, and I've been thinking about smaller town schools. And one of the things that's in our platform here that can get us started on this conversation is that we intend to reform education in several ways, but included in that is the introduction of alternative schooling tax credits. Okay, alternative schooling tax credits, the goal of which would be to put choices of alternative schooling outside of the public school system within the reach of most people, ideally all people in Ontario, by providing tax credits to help pay for it. What that will do in relation to smaller towns and big cities is that it will cause, once the market is there, once people have the money to be able to pay modest sums of money, I'm not talking $15,000 a year tuition for schools, once they'll be able to put their children maybe in a Christian school or to do homeschooling, or maybe some other sort of bubble will come up, the market will see new schools being formed. And I predict that you will see in small towns, a few teachers will get together and you'll see the equivalent of the old one-room schoolhouse come back, where you'll have a few school teachers working outside of the public school system and offering an excellent education close to home in your small towns.
Thanks, Keith. Dylan?
Yeah, thank you. That's a nice loud beeper. Yeah, great question. I've heard from a lot of people doing a lot of door knocking. People are worried about education, what that's going to look like. And again, I can't even imagine what that feels like on a rural level right now. But people certainly have not forgotten about the cuts to education under Doug Ford, and particularly Bill 124 that's affected all education workers and unfairly capped their wages at 1%. Which in turn also affects our kids, right? So the NDP plans to review and fix the current funding formula that unfairly targets rural schools. The plan would be to work with parents, frontline education workers, students, and educational experts to overhaul the current formula, which is not working. The comprehensive review would be done within a year's time. Certainly once we get that data, then we can decide where to go from there. We also plan to support rural schools as as their communities grow by doubling the Rural and Northern Education Fund, which is going to add a substantial amount of money. Obviously, like I said, doubling it over the next 3 years. We are also open to considering new models that potentially could allow for, the sharing of school space in rural ridings rather than closing small schools, maybe to reimagine that space, but that's ultimately going to be up to the communities because the communities know best what is going to work for them. Yeah, I see I have 5 seconds. Thank you.
Thanks, Dylan. Carla?
So the pandemic was really hard the last 2 years were really hard on schools, specifically on students and on parents. We saw them open, we saw them close, we open, close, open, close. So, and in addition to that, a lot of parents didn't want to mask their kids at school for whatever reason. Maybe they had a medical mask exemption. So because of this, we're seeing a lot of parents are bringing their kids home and have made the choice to homeschool their children. So we would like to, so this goes like within the city, but also it works with the rural area. We do want to provide to support tax relief to parents who choose alternative education. For example, homeschool or learning pods. That's a newer thing that we're seeing in more cities. And so that tax credit, that's the tax credit that will reclaim that portion of your household property tax that would normally go to the Board of Education. Since the parents aren't using the Board of Education, we want it to come back to the parents. In addition to that, we do see the need for trades. And so we are proposing to expand the availability of trade-focused programs in high school, similar to that with Alexander Mackenzie. And so specifically to the rural areas, we support the promotion of agricultural programs for youth and student work placement programs for youth. We will work with high schools to implement a student farmer program and a farm help program to harvest time-giving credits to the students' hours. I'm done. You got the gist of it.
Thanks, Carol. Bob?
Yeah, thanks, Jared. Well, I just want to kind of correct the record. We actually are building and opening more schools and classrooms things got delayed a bit with COVID, but in the last 4 years, we've predicted that we're going to build more schools. I know I've been a number of openings myself. Forest is building a new K-12 school. We just announced the other day there's a major expansion going on out at Arrow Road School. So, an important, rural schools are important to the rural community. I grew up in the rural community, and I know there's a number of people in the room I can tell they probably went to a one-room school like I did. And, you know, I think we all got a pretty good education there, but certainly education's moved on from there. It's important that what we're doing, expanding the internet out into rural Ontario, so that people, if they do have to choose to educate at home, they'll have access to the internet. And we're also going to introduce, the minister has talked about introducing skills in agriculture, farming, and other trades in as early as elementary school before they even get to high school. So anyway, that's my take on the education.
Thanks, Bob. Mark?
Thanks, George. I teach, so this is a question that's really personal to me. Over the last 2 years, students across the province have been dealt an unfair deal. Remote learning, lost social time, struggles with isolation, familiar to every family. I've had students who couldn't attend class by video because their internet connection wasn't strong enough. I've had students who had to leave class early because the phone or tablet they were attending class on had to go to work with their parent, and they just had to leave for the rest of the day. The way Ontario funds schools is based on a decades-old one-size-fits-all formula, one that forces smaller and rural schools to close. We'll review and update how schools are funded in rural Ontario from top to bottom. We'll also expand internet access with a goal of bringing high-speed broadband to every Ontario household and business by 2025. Unlike the Ford Conservatives, who cut last year's education budget by $1.3 billion, Ontario Liberals will make important investments in our schools so that our students can make up for this lost time. We'll improve the quality of our schools by capping class size at 20 students in all grades, eliminating mandatory online learning, and ending academic streaming. We'll also take Ford's misguided Highway 413 investment and put that $10 billion into eliminating our school repair backlog. We'll reinstate the optional grade 13 as a more structured alternative to the informal and often discouraged Victory Lap. Only the Ontario Liberals have a plan to help find success in schools.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, so next question, and we'll be starting with Dylan. This on conservation. What are your party's plans for conservation authorities?
Yeah, I have a relatively short answer for this one, but again, in short, an NDP government will restore the powers of the conservation authorities and reverse harmful cuts and changes that have left our homes and businesses at greater risk of floods due to climate change.
Thanks, Carla.
Okay, so I don't understand a lot about conservation authorities. I'll be completely transparent with you, but is it someone from the audience that asked that question, or I'd like to get with that person, learn a little bit more about it and find out what their views are, or get out there and speak to you, or I will go and find the answer and bring it back to you. I'm just being transparent.
It's one that we've raised through the OFA, through our group.
Oh, then I'd like to talk with the OFA then.
There you go.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Okay, Bob?
Yeah, well, thank you. That's an issue I've been dealing with for 15 years, it seems, since I first got elected. I know it's a real tug of war, a battle between the rural community, small town Ontario, and conservation authorities. I think lately we've given the authority, more authority to the municipalities to push back. We've taken away someone who wants to restore their powers. I think there's a lot of people in the rural community won't want to hear that, because we've heard from people that want to see them have less power because they've inserted themselves. I see a lot of people in the crowd nodding their head. They know what I'm talking about. And, they were good. They brought them in after Hurricane Hazel, and they controlled a lot of floodways, and they're certainly necessary at the time. But they're out there, the conservation authorities, in a lot of cases, doing things they shouldn't do. Nothing to do with conservation. They've had all these staff, they have to employ them to find other things for them to do. So they need to get back to a regular job, preserving farmland, preventing flooding. We've got a number of opportunities that we've made in that case. So thanks for the question. Maybe we can talk later.
Okay, Mark?
Thanks. I mentioned part of this before, pushing back against Ford's anti-conservation agenda, bringing more lands under the Greenbelt protection, close collaboration with local and Indigenous communities and farmers, strengthening the powers of the conservation authorities to provide them with the tools and the resources they need to prevent the flooding and protect the other natural resources. That's been spelled out in our plan from the very beginning. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Keith?
Okay, I've had a chance to discover some of the work of the conservation authorities, both as a result of my work in the minerals industry and also as a result of my participation in a recent study of potential wind turbine interference with water wells out in Chatham, Kent. And I think that the conservation authorities in general do a pretty good job, but I think we need to maybe rethink their mandate just a little bit, and we maybe need to retool them just a little bit too as a function of their mandate. I think what we really need to do is to sit down with them and also with stakeholders in the agricultural industry like yourselves and decide how the conservation authority can maximize the effort to help you with preserving your land and avoiding flooding and avoiding pollution, while all at the same time preserving habitats and rivers and such for aquatic species. I don't think there's any conflict between at all, and I don't think you do either, between farming and protecting the environment. I think we could probably, this is one case where I would think we could maybe add a little bit of funding to something in government, as a matter of fact, pretty much right off the bat. I think this organization can do a lot to help farmers, you know that, but I think maybe they've been tending to get in the way a little bit too much recently, and we just need to redefine their mandate, retool them a little bit so that they do a better job for all of us, including the agricultural section.
Thanks, Keith. Okay, we're back to Carla again. So, this on commodity processing. What will your government do to grow processing of all commodities in agriculture? So beef, pork, vegetables, whatever.
Well, I mean, we would support any and all ideas that the farmers would have that would support them. We would offer, again, grants, subsidies, any loans that they would need to begin that startup on those, on the beef, on these new farming.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Yeah, that's a
Thanks,
good
Carl.
question. We've got a program on processing capacity, and we've invested, Ford government invested $10 million in the new food security and supply chain fund to assist the agri-food sector and experiencing supply chain challenges. Also, that adds on to the $25 million investment in strategic agri-food processing fund, which is growing the supply of available processing capacities throughout the province, with a special focus on underserved and even northern communities. $14 million to increase processing capacity for the meat plants, and it is also why, if re-elected in Ontario, PC government would set aside another $5 million to maintain the commitment of agri-recovery programming to beef and pork farmers that are facing those processing challenges. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Mark?
Thanks. For much of the past 2 years, Ontario hasn't been open for business. The pandemic's devastating impacts on people's jobs and small businesses were made worse by Doug Ford's chaotic decision-making. We're down to just giants for meat processing. It's time to get the fundamentals right to make life easier for small businesses so they can bounce back or start up again. That's why we'll eliminate corporate taxes for small businesses hurt deeply by the pandemic for 2 years. We'll backstop loans of tens of thousands of small businesses. We'll fund programs that can help small and medium-sized businesses go digital. We'll make strategic investments in hard-hit industries. We'll help entrepreneurs and small business owners by eliminating incorporation fees and helping to navigate all the government supports. We'll take on the mega companies and their abusive behavior, as I mentioned before, towards farmers by legislating fair and open negotiations between the retailers and suppliers. This will drive down our food prices in the long term. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Keith?
Okay, I'd like to bring up quickly a couple of topics that I think address this question. From reading through the OFA website and also the OMAFRA website to a lesser degree, I came across a couple of very interesting concepts that I think you're discussing quite a lot that kind of fall under the same rubric. One is value-added production locally, and the other is the establishment of local food hubs. I really like this idea of bringing value-added industry and jobs back into small communities so that meat and other agricultural products that are produced locally are also processed locally, and to a large degree perhaps brought to market locally as well. That will also help with the supply chain, of course, because the supply chain is shorter. If the food that you process and that you consume to a large degree is produced locally, the supply chain is shorter. In order to promote the development of something like local food hubs and local value-added production, we would look at lowering the corporate tax for small industry as well, but not just for 2 years, folks, permanently. We're paying in line with our general philosophy as a low-tax small government party. The New Blue Party would look at lowering lots of taxes, and especially corporate taxes for small industry, permanently. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Dylan?
Yeah, thanks for the question. We have some of the best agricultural land in the world here in southwestern Ontario, and we grow some of the best crops as well. Yet my understanding is that all too often we send sort of raw materials out of the country rather than processing them here in Ontario. And we need to better support the agro-food industry here in Ontario. The NDP will develop a provincial food strategy to strengthen Ontario's food security and the resilience of our food systems. Our food strategy will put healthy, locally sourced food on Ontario tables, support farm jobs in food processing, transportation, biofuels, and retail. We plan to work with farming groups to ensure that young farmers can get their foot in the door. We'll help young farm families and first-time farmers get established in agriculture, whether it be through mentorship, financial advice, or loan guarantees. We also believe that broadband is an essential service and something that can help here. We will ensure that provincial broadband investments prioritize underserved communities here in rural Ontario and guaranteeing reliable, affordable, and future-proofed broadband service for every Ontarian. The NDP is committed to an Ontario manufacturing strategy as well. That will retain good jobs and invest, as I mentioned, in the cap and trade revenue programs with the 25% revenue coming back into rural communities. Thank you.
Thanks, Dylan. I'm going to slip another one in here because it kind of fits here as long as I don't get shot by the people behind me. But what's your party's stand on supply management? Supply management. Bob's first. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we support supply management. I think this is the 5th election I've been asked about supply management. I know there's many people in the room that are part of supply management. So, in a word, I know the minister is a very strong, Minister Thompson is a very strong supporter of supply management, and I am as well. I know that many people in this room have made a good living at that. It's great for them to pass on to their children and grandchildren to be able to be successful. And I'm sure there's many other farmers in different other industries that wish that they were part of supply management, but that's a decision that was made a long time ago. Maybe there might be an opportunity down the road for others that aren't part of it to join. So I support farm supply management very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Mark?
Thank you. I too support supply management. I've heard a lot about how we would be flooded with foreign dairy if it weren't for supply management. It would be a drop in the bucket for the US, but it would wipe out the viability of any kind of dairy in Ontario. I'm all for it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Keith?
Okay. Sorry, Keith. No problem. Okay. Well, in general, I'm pretty much a hardcore free market guy. However, with regards to supply management, this is a place where I can be very flexible for multiple reasons. Flexible enough that I don't see any reason why we need to do away with it. For multiple reasons. One of them is that we have farms here that probably for generations have been built and established and grown based on a business model that includes supply management. So pulling the rug out from underneath the people makes absolutely zero sense whatsoever. And there's, as my colleague here from the Liberal Party pointed out a moment ago, we are a relatively small we have a relatively small production compared to our neighbor to the south. A little bit of protectionism from time to time is not necessarily a bad thing, so that we can preserve our food sovereignty. I like that term, food sovereignty, here in Ontario and in Canada. So I'm not against supply management at all. I think it should be preserved. Maybe we can look at it, maybe we can make some modifications to it, but if that were to be done, it would be done in collaboration and consultation with all of the interested partners, for sure.
Thanks, Keith. Dylan?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we know that people have been getting left behind these past few years, and that needs to change, and ultimately, we absolutely fully support supply management. I echo what other people have said. You know, we need to ensure fairness for farmers and consumers.
Thanks. Carla?
Well, I'll admit I had to look up supply management because I heard an awful lot of times people saying supply management, supply management. So yes, of course, like the others, I do support supply management, and from what I understood in the 2 seconds that I read, it seems to be, I think that we need to just continue to keep as much farming in Ontario as we can. I think that's what I'm, I don't really understand it, I'll be honest. I had 2 seconds to read it.
I'm sure there's some in the room would be happy to educate you.
That's exactly what I would like to do.
Okay, our next question, we start with Mark, and it involves labor supply. How does your party plan to address the labor shortages?
Thank you. We've got big plans for labor. One of the ways we can increase the labor supply in the immediate term in Ontario is by creating our own Minister of Immigration like Quebec has. So we can bring in not just skilled trade workers, and not just temporary foreign workers, but bring them in right away. At the same time, funding these programs will create new skilled laborers in Ontario, paying people for apprenticeships, building more pathways to work in Ontario. Temporary foreign workers are an important part of farming in Ontario. We know that every worker deserves safe job sites, humane working conditions, and a chance to earn economic dignity. While the temporary foreign worker program is federally administered, the horrific conditions we all saw during the pandemic were avoidable. Ford Conservatives' failure to develop and communicate centralized, coordinated public health guidelines left many essential workers vulnerable and caused confusion for farmers and businesses trying to follow the rules. We'll ensure it doesn't repeat itself by reversing cuts to public health and conducting a public inquiry to learn more about our COVID-19 response with an eye towards developing a pandemic plan that receives mandatory public reviews and updates. We'll also insert that control over the immigration system, filling the skill gaps in rural Ontario, improving opportunities for agricultural workers to come here and work outside of that temporary foreign worker system. No worker deserves to live in the conditions that they've seen exposed throughout the pandemic, and we're committed to supporting a better path forward. Thank you.
Okay, Mark, just one quick thing. I referred to you as my colleague there inadvertently a few minutes ago. I hope I didn't shock you too badly when I did that. Okay, labor shortages. I like this one. This ties in a little bit with my experience working as a university academic. Something that I think we could promote or perhaps improve on, because I'm not sure if this exists yet. Do we have something in this in Ontario that would resemble what a co-op program with colleges and universities? If we don't, we should have it. This is something that we had in a university where I worked, where students would do their 4-year program or their 3-year program, and each semester or each year, part of one semester would actually be spent on a job site, working in an industry, and they would be credited. They would get academic credits for that, and I could see that working very well with agriculture, and that would also help immediately alleviate labor shortage a bit, and then in the longer term it would alleviate labor shortage because you would have well-trained student graduates arriving in the job market who already had hands-on experience. That's one thing. Another thing is I note that the OFA provides bursaries, 5 bursaries a year, $2,000 each, for students and postgrads and apprenticeships. And I'm thinking that that's not a huge sum of money for the government to match, at least. I mean, if the government's going to throw some more money at something, there's a relatively low-cost thing that we could put some money into very quickly to match whatever bursaries that you folks offer to students we could match that with government funds. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Dylan?
Yeah, thanks. The NDP will work with manufacturers to bring in a new labor force strategy. We'll find workers to fill vacancies and provide appropriate training for the workers of tomorrow. We're also planning to promote the values of trade schools and work with tradespeople, employers, and educational institutes to create new opportunities for education and apprenticeships, including working with school boards to expand opportunities for hands-on learning in high schools. The NDP will also prioritize a system to recognize the skills and credentials of foreign educated workers, with a focus on healthcare especially. We'll create a job matching program to guarantee internationally trained physicians get experience in Ontario and make it easier for internationally trained nurses to have their clinical experiences recognized, because that's been an issue as of late. The NDP will create thousands of new paid co-op and internship opportunities for young people. We'll invest to create thousands of new paid placements for post-secondary students to get real-life work experience. The NDP is also planning on doubling the Ontario's Career Ready program from the 2020 levels, so Ontario colleges and universities can create additional work integrated learning opportunities. And finally, I mentioned it just before, but we talked about retrofitting homes and businesses, which is also going to lead to creating hundreds of thousands of jobs.
Thanks, Dylan. Carla?
Well, so to start off with, we do call for the immediate rehiring of all workers who have been terminated or placed on unpaid leave as a result of vaccine policies. We have tens of thousands of Canadians and Ontarians, actually Ontarians out of work right now due to these policies, and over a vaccine that was absolutely a clinical trial, and the data's in. The efficacy isn't great. You can get COVID with or without a vaccine. So I don't see any reason why we still have workers people who are still unemployed over a vaccine mandate. You'll notice that the legacy parties ignore this like it doesn't matter. We're crying for healthcare workers, teachers, civil servants. We need postal workers, PSWs, like all healthcare workers. We're in a crisis in many of these areas, and yet we have people sitting at home who are willing, ready, and able to work, not able to come back to work. In addition to that, I did discuss that we really want to focus on the trades. So we would like to implement a trades-focused program within the high schools. We know that at Alexander Mackenzie and Sarnia, they're doing it, but we'd like to see it move through other high schools.
Thanks, Carla. Bob?
Well, thank you for that question. So we're actually, the government through the minister has actually already announced recently, when the House was still sitting, $4 million to launch the Ontario Agri Career Support Initiative. Has to build a strong competitive workforce. We've also supplied to the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, called Feeding Your Future. There's $617,000 there to help with the labor shortage and job concierge service and career college fairs, etc. And also we invest over $200,000 with the Food and Beverage Ontario to help train workers there. And also the minister announced $36 million to the Enhanced Agri-Food Workplace Protection Program to protect and support the health of workers. And I know that there was over 5,500 HEPA units for the workplace for the foreign workers that come to work in both the greenhouses and that. And also the government elected, if elected again, a further $10 million in the next year in the Enhanced Agri-Food Workplace Protection Program to help those farms, those agri-food operators, and there's many other programs. These programs are already in effect by our newest minister, and as far as immigration, Minister McNaughton, who's the labor minister, is also the labor and immigration minister in our government.
Thanks, Bob. Mark?
I was the first to answer.
Oh, you were the first one. Sorry. The moderator needs to be woke up every once. Okay, so this time we'll start with Keith. If elected, will your party take immediate steps to increase funding to the Ontario Risk Management Program, RMP, to $250 million annually to ensure the program is adequately resourced and responsive to rapidly changing and increasing volatile domestic and global conditions?
Yes, I'm pretty familiar with that program, and I'll start by saying, providing a little context. The New Blue Party is not in the business, and I've said this many times in other meetings, we're not in the business of throwing money at problems without first analyzing them and understanding exactly what the problem is, building a roadmap to solve the problem, and then funding it accordingly, and having accountability for the expenditures of that money afterward. That said, what I would do, or what we would do, I guess as a party I should say, is to look at that program, sit down with the stakeholders, ask ourselves, what are the goals? Are we achieving them? If not, why not? What are the roadblocks? How do we overcome them? And what kind of funding do we need to do that? And if it's $250 million, I think you were suggesting, I think that's what the number you cited, fine. Maybe it'll be 300. Maybe it'll be 158. But we'll look at it and we'll do it right. And we'll analyze it every year, maybe every 6 months, look at the results and ask ourselves, are we doing what we should be doing? Is it working? If not, we'll modify it and refund it. But the first thing we need to do is to understand what the goals are that we're trying to achieve and build a roadmap, build a strategy to achieve them. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Dylan?
Yeah, from what I understand, farming is hard work, and farmers take a lot of risk to make sure that we have safe, affordable food and a food supply. These risks are going to increase as we deal with increased weather challenges from climate change, and we should be doing all that we can to support our farmers because, again, they're the ones who are providing food onto our tables. The NDP absolutely will lift the cap on the risk management program to ensure it provides real protection to farms and farmers. As part of our recently released costed platform, we have budgeted an additional, just want to make sure I have this right, but an additional $50 million in the first year, 75 in the second, and 100 in the third year. So this will bring the cap up from 150 million to 250 million as per the question. And we're also looking to work with our federal colleagues to increase the federal risk program as well.
Thanks, Dylan. Carla?
So we do support any and all funding that the farmers will need because the simple fact is, as I've said before, this is a critical, our food source is critical. So whatever the farmers need, we will work with them. We'll find out, but we do want to make sure that there are no inefficiencies within that program. So we would want to, just like the New Blue said, they'd want to really look it over, continue to reevaluate it. But that would be of, the farmers are concerned all the time about their risks. So yes, we would do whatever it takes to help them.
Thanks, Carl. Bob?
Yeah, thanks, George, and that's a good question. Like I said earlier at a different question, the budget, 2022-2023 budget increased the risk management program by another $50 million. And I know the minister, I just spoke to her actually on the way over here tonight, and she asked me to make sure that I communicated that she intends to take another look and ensure that the risk management program is responsive and reflects the needs of the sector today and tomorrow. So I would commit to working with, if I'm honored to be re-elected, I will work with the minister and with the government to advocate with the Federation of Agriculture, of course, and the rest of the agricultural community to make the risk management program what it should be. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. Mark?
Thanks. I mentioned before some of the business supports that we have in our plan. If I understand it right, that $50 million for the RMP, that went to grains and oilseeds, not to beef, right? It was just a very specific increase. So we need more in RMP to cover all different types of farming. It helps producers manage risks, fluctuating costs, market price. It's a complement, as I understand, to agri-stability and production insurance. So I absolutely support increases in it to protect everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Dylan, for this one. What will your party do to help expand natural gas infrastructure to rural homes, grain dryers, and livestock farms?
a little bit harder going first, I guess, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, ultimately what that comes down to is, who are the experts in terms of knowing where these need to go, where these lines need to be, and who needs the energy and how do we do it. Ultimately, that's not me, right? That's this community. So if there's a need in this community, that's who we're going to go ask. So certainly would support, we talked about the cap and trade system, which is bringing 25% of that revenue into rural communities. And whether we're dumping that into education or energy or what have you, what we're going to do is we're going to work with these communities, particularly giving more power back to municipalities as well. So again, not specifically a question I feel like I can answer as much as saying it's about the communities and what the communities feel like they need, and then certainly acting on that.
Thanks, Dylan. Carla?
Oh, I do agree with Dylan, and I have basically the same concept as, we need to get into the communities, find out what their actual needs are, and the only way that we're going to know the needs of the community is to speak with them and work that out with them.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yes, well, we've already made those kind of announcements across Southwestern Ontario, especially here in Lambton, up in Warwick. I know there was announcements in Bedford with the new government at the time, 1819, as we're expanding natural gas into rural Ontario. There's lots more to do. Kind of goes hand in hand with the broadband. We have to get, we've invested $4 billion over the next few years to expand broadband out to every community if possible. And the natural gas is the same. I led the fight in Queen's Park to, it's kind of the same thing, to preserve Line 5 in Sarnia. It's how a lot of the products and the gas that gets from Alberta and that into Ontario. We led that fight there and had a unanimous vote, which we didn't expect at the time, but when it was all over, it was a take-note debate, and when it was all done, the NDP and the Liberals and everyone else in the House supported us. So I'm very proud of that, and we'll continue to fight for natural gas, pipelines, etc. in this community, because I know that the farmers, if you have to use propane or whatever to dry your grain, it's the next thing on, it's getting more unaffordable. So we need to get that natural gas out there.
Thanks, Bob. Mark?
Thanks. The question about natural gas is a question about affordability, the cost of living, the cost of doing business. That means the cost of infrastructure. We're the only party willing to invest in infrastructure in the amounts that we need. In addition to that, we also want to invest in helping you be self-sustainable, things like digesters where you can produce your own methane and natural gas from your own compost or pre-compost. Every part of our plan focuses on affordability for everyone in Ontario. So yes, we want more natural gas, we want more broadband, we want it to be easy to do business, to focus on your core values, your core competency, not worrying about paying for it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Keith?
Well, that's interesting. Everyone here seems to agree that we need to use more hydrocarbons. And where is this natural gas? Well, most of it happens to be somewhere quite far west of here. And how are we going to get it here? If only there were some way, if only there were some safe, efficient way to get that natural gas from out west here to Ontario. I wonder, oh wait, pipelines. That might work. We really need to work with our partners in other provinces to put heavy pressure on the federal government, which quite frankly I think is almost a lost cause in this country now, the federal government, to free up. Yeah, I think Ontario really needs to step forward a little bit like Quebec has and develop a little bit more and enforce a little bit more in the way of autonomy, as do all of the other provinces. Then we can have a looser confederation and we can decide how we're going to make this country work. We need to, okay, there, I'm down to 30 seconds. So we need to work with all the partners involved, the producers and the other provinces that need to consume this product, and we need to build the pipelines to get it here to Ontario. Once it gets here, we can work with the local community and figure out exactly what the distribution, geographical distribution of the product needs to be here. But first, we need to get it from Alberta to Ontario. And we need to start working on that real fast. You've seen the price of your heating bill, and and your gasoline go up a little bit recently, I think. It's only going to get worse, folks, if we don't start exploiting our massive natural resources wealth in this country that's waiting there to be tapped.
Thanks, Keith. I'll just remind you, when you clap in the middle of someone's statement, their clock is running. So you lose that
That's okay. That's okay.
time off of his time. Okay, I guess we started with Dylan on that one. So. Okay, so we're to Carla. How will you address the looming healthcare worker crisis, addressing the impending shortages of healthcare workers given their exhaustion, addressing the backlog of patient needs, and the increasing aggression of some patients, especially since shortages affect our small rural hospitals first?
Well, I mean, again, I'm gonna go back to hiring back those nurses. That's the first way to stop the healthcare shortage, is to bring back the nurses that you fired. Bring back the healthcare workers that you fired. There is no good reason for those healthcare workers not to work. Here is one other thing that I do agree with both the NDP and the Liberal Party, is we need to axe Bill 124. It's unfair that the nurses are capped on wages. They're unhappy, they're underpaid, we've been working short. The pandemic did not cause this health crisis. It's been around for decades. Every single election we come around, healthcare, healthcare, healthcare. It's always been about a shortage, but so in the middle of a pandemic, our Ford government thought it was a good idea to fire healthcare workers. And now they want to try to retain them. So they're giving them $5,000 bonus. It's a temporary solution to solve to try and solve a permanent problem. Act 124, bring them back and pay them what they're worth.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we're hiring more PSWs, more nurses. There's a rumor going around about this government's going to privatize healthcare in this province. There's nothing further from the truth. We're spending billions more. I think Blue Water Health in Lambton County alone, they're spending $40 million. The government gave them, taxpayers gave them $40 million more than what they had 4 years ago to operate. I know I've delivered money, announcements with the hospital. We've hired all kinds of new people, created new spaces, training for them. Lambton College is going to have nursing programs right here in Lambton, so nurses, men and women can train here, stay here. And at the end of the day, the hospitals, or whoever the employers were the ones that, whatever decisions they made on their own. They made them because they made decisions at the board level of employees, their work status, etc. So I would agree with that.
Thank you, Bob. Mark?
Ontarians have a clear choice between a Liberal Party that will make the much needed investments to clear the surgical backlog, reduce wait times for mental health services, and support modernized care for everyone, and the Ford Conservatives, who hoarded federal COVID-19 funding while our hospitals and long-term care homes scrambled to stay afloat. Our Liberal team includes doctors, nurses, and hospital leadership. Working with this group will end the Ford Conservatives' fight against healthcare heroes by raising the personal support worker base pay to at least $25 an hour. Similarly, we'll repeal Bill 124 and ensure that mental health services are available for all healthcare professionals. We'll train and hire 100,000 nurses, doctors, and other healthcare workers over the next 6 years as we replace retiring workers and expand our system. We'll clear the surgical and diagnostic backlog with $1 billion investment in additional capacity over the next 2 years. We'll ensure everybody has access to a doctor or nurse within 24 hours and grow the number of hospital beds by 20%. We'll get more people the mental health supports they need by reversing the Ford Conservative cuts and investing an additional $3 billion on top of that to reduce wait times. We'll modernize healthcare with greater access to primary care.
Sorry, before you start, just a reminder, these are two minutes, so.
Thank you. Sorry, just losing my voice a little bit here. Thanks everyone for coming, and as we get started here, it's pretty clear that everybody up at this table realizes the importance of this community and all farming communities across Ontario. So these are certainly important matters, and ones that I'm certainly going to continue to be listening to. Much of our produce comes from the southern United States, which we know are drying up, and the war in Ukraine means that our wheat supplies will be drastically cut this year. Climate change continues to impact our current food network, and we must do more to support our farmers in Ontario to ensure that we have access to reliable, affordable supply of food. We need a plan now that stops paving over farmland, reduces urban sprawl, and stops using municipal zoning orders to build in places where things should not be built. The NDP will develop a provincial water strategy based on the principle that decisions about water must be based on public interest and guarantee farmers and the public access to sustainable water sources. Our water needs to stop be given away practically for free to large corporations that are simply bottling it and turning around and selling it for a fortune. The NDP will continue to fully support supply management as a model that ensures that farmers and consumers are treated fairly. While I've never lived on a farm, I have heard from those in this community and other communities that have. There's obviously a resilience within this community that isn't fully understood or appreciated by those who have not experienced it firsthand. My promise moving forward will be to listen to this community and advocate on behalf of it whenever I can. The credit that this community gets pales in comparison to the actual work that you do. We need to do a better job of supporting you, and thank you for the hard work that you do every day to feed and provide the people of Sarnia-Lambton, but also of Ontario. Thank you.
Thank you, Dylan. Keith?
All right, I'm going to change topic a little bit here, and I'm going to back up and take a 30,000-foot view. And I'm going to talk about why I'm running in this election and why I think it's important that all of us can give consideration to what I'm about to say. I got into this election campaign because I couldn't stand on the sidelines anymore and watch this province and indeed our country drift further and further left into authoritarianism and ultimately into tyranny. That's a strong word to use. Come out to Krabby Joe's in Petrolia tomorrow, where we're going to have a meet and greet, and listen to me talk at more length about that, and I'd love to justify the use of that word. I was motivated to add this to the end as my closing remarks earlier today when I took a phone call from a new blue voter, who was a historical PC voter. He called me up today, a gentleman who escaped from behind the Iron Curtain in the 1960s. He said, I can no longer vote for the PCs. I'm thinking about voting for you. Tell me more. After I got done telling him more, he said, you have my vote. And he said, here's why. He said, I escaped from the Iron Curtain in the 1960s. I escaped from Czechoslovakia to Canada. And now I wake up and I look around myself and I see the Czechoslovakia of the 1960s. This is basically, we're drifting into a Soviet-style authoritarian state. We see it in Ottawa. We see it with Doug Ford ordering police to set up random checkpoints on our roads to force us to show our papers and justify our presence on the roads. We've seen it with lockdowns. We've seen it with nurses and other healthcare workers being fired from their jobs for refusing to accept a COVID shot. We cannot continue to drift in this direction. I made this decision really when I was laying flat on my back about a year ago undergoing cancer treatment, and I am now 100% committed to spending the next years of my life fighting this tyranny.
Thank you, Keith. Mark?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me out here. I don't know many of you, but I know your kids, I know your siblings, I know your cousins. I buy my eggs at the market from a woman I went to high school with. I buy my beef a quarter at a time from a good friend from high school. And when that's not available, I buy it from the local country butcher in Sarnia. So maybe from some of you. I know about the reputation for farm grandma pies because of a good friend of mine. He told me he'd never miss a chance. And I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to me, to come see me, listen to what I have to say, to tell you about the Ontario Liberal Party, our fully costed plan, the way it meets your needs here
Not only is it fully costed, but it allows for balancing of the budget. We're being smart with this. We've had this plan from the get-go. We haven't changed it 6 times. We have a plan on paper that you can read, you can see. We have all the numbers. I have a huge list of all the hot points I don't have time to talk about in 2 minutes, but it's all available through my website. As MPP, I'll be a strong voice and advocate for you, working with leadership to ensure that we are both part of the conversation and well supported. The choice is yours. Do you want 4 more years of Doug Ford where election promises aren't published, where only his rich friends benefit in the end? More cuts to public funding and privatization? More manipulation of law to benefit rich donors and stifle the voices of opposition? More bouncing in and out of lockdowns, opening and closing schools, and sacrificing lives for the sake of commerce? More chaos with a premier who doesn't show up to Parliament 82% of the time and hides when a province is in crisis? Do you want the NDP plan that's being made up as they go, with a platform that's been revised 6 times during the campaign, wasn't fully costed until halfway through the campaign, and it's a plan that'll cost your families more money? Or do you want the Liberal plan that puts money back in your pocket and was fully costed from day one? The only plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Bob?
Well, thank you. I could say a lot, but I'm going to close out here just to keep it nice. I want to thank the Federation for putting on the event tonight, and also thank all my colleagues here at the table. I'm sure they all have the best interests of the province, and of course this county, this riding as well. And I've had the honor and the privilege of representing people in this room and across the county for the last 15 years. I think I've done a relatively good job. I've got great staff in my constituent office. I've worked with a number of you in this room and others that aren't here to solve problems, and every day, each and every day, we're answering that phone down there. So thank you again to the Federation for having us tonight, and I look forward to Election Day, and hopefully when you think about a lot of the stuff that was said here tonight, go home and sleep on it, then give me a call. We'll certainly have lots to say there.
Thank you, Bob. Carl?
I just want to thank all of you for having me here in your presence in Brigden. I'm excited to have some pie. I want to also thank you for, staying and listening and putting up with the fact that I actually don't know a lot about farming. I talked to you about it in the beginning in my opening, and I meant what I said. I do want to meet you. I do want to come to your farms, and I do want to learn more. Please don't let the fact that I don't know a lot at this point, don't let you think that I won't learn. I want to tell you a little bit in closing just about the party that I work with and a few other things. So the PPO won't present you with billion-dollar promises paid for on the backs of Ontarians. We offer realistic solutions. We promise to put the people first. We will look for inefficiencies in the current government programs, and we will reallocate the excess funds to where they are needed first. We support tax cuts, not increases. We recognize that agriculture is our most critical financial asset. Simply put, if the farmers fail, we starve. We commit to working with you to find real attainable solutions to preserve our food source. I look forward to learning from each and every one of you, hearing your concerns, and together finding solutions that I can bring back to Queen's Park. This election is an important one because we need change. Many Ontarians are seeking to change the leadership of the province. I too am one of them. We are all tired of a government that has not only trampled on our individual rights, one that has broken promises, spent our money to lock us down, implement mandates, to divide our province and take away our jobs. On June 2nd, we need to change the vote. We have tried in the past to vote out political parties. We need to end up with the same, and then we always end up with the same result. We saw it in the last federal election. This election, please vote with your conscience. Vote for the local candidate who you feel will most represent you personally.
Thank you. That's good. Now we can